On March 3, 2022, around 9 p.m., Corey Richens and her husband, Eric, were celebrating her recent purchase of a new property for her real estate business. During the evening, around 11 p.m., Corey made Eric a nightcap, his favorite, a Moscow Mule. This vodka-based drink is known for its strong notes of mint, lime, and ginger beer. Keep that detail in mind, it will be important later. Corey brought the drink to their bedroom, where Eric began sipping it in bed. The couple had been working on their marriage after a challenging period, and Corey had shared with friends that things were improving. Together, they had 3 sons and lived in Camas, Utah, a town that offers a rural lifestyle with spacious properties. Situated roughly 40 miles east of Salt Lake City, their home provided them with a luxurious life filled with amenities and comfort. After giving Eric his drink, Corey claimed she went to bed shortly afterward. However, before she could fall asleep, one of her sons awoke her after a nightmare. She stated she stayed with him to soothe him back to sleep, eventually falling asleep there as well. She stated that she woke in the middle of the night around 3 a.m. before returning to her bed. There, she found her husband slumped on the floor at the end of the bed. She touched his foot and found it cold to the touch. She claimed that she got her phone that she had left plugged in on her side of the bed and called 911. She then started to perform CPR. First responders arrived attempting to revive Eric, but he was pronounced dead at the scene. This is the story that Corey Richens told police when they interviewed her. The autopsy would show a different story. When the toxicology report came back, it revealed that Eric Richens died from a fentanyl overdose that was 5 times the lethal dose. The medical examiner reported that the fentanyl had been orally ingested, which was noted as unusual. Law enforcement interviewed Corey. In the interview, the detective would inform Corey about the fentanyl overdose. In the interview, Corey was adamant that her husband didn't do drugs. The detective conducting the interview would also say that they were starting to look at how the drug got into his system and that they would need to search the house for all electronics. During the interview, they also seized Corey's cell phone, which she had just brought. Here are some snippets of the transcription from that interview. Corey Richens, he doesn't do drugs. Detective Woody, we're gonna go check the house. We want to make sure there's nothing there because this is super dangerous. It's dangerous for you. It's dangerous for your kids. Later in the interview, Detective Woody, it's kind of odd that there was nothing there that we saw. I don't know if you were trying to clean it up so he wouldn't get in trouble or this didn't get out. So we also have warrants for all electronics so that in case you ordered anything on the phone, if you tried to keep us Corey Richens, is it cut crack? Like it's Detective Woody, it's fentanyl, that it's a pretty deadly drug. It's something that's not, it's becoming more common. Then the interview ends with them leaving with Corey to go search the house. Police would start to investigate the death as suspicious, possibly a homicide. Not every overdose would be suspicious, but Eric was not known to have a drug problem, and everyone who knew Eric knew that he loved his family very much, and he had every intention to stay a part of that family. The family home was searched, and the electronics, including Corey's phone, were taken into evidence. But who is Eric Richens? Eric was born on May 13, 1982. He was 39 when he died. He reportedly was an excellent outdoorsman, hunting, and worked on his family cattle farm. He was the oldest with 2 younger sisters. When he was younger, he worked and learned about working on the ranch, tending to cattle and horses, hauling hay, and feeding the animals, but he also had a bachelor's degree from the University of Utah in International Studies with a minor in Spanish. He learned Spanish during a 2-year mission with his church to Mexico. He owned a successful high-end masonry business specializing in high-end projects. He owned the company with his friend Cody Wright. Corey and Eric met while Corey worked at Home Depot as a front counter person. They got married in 2013 in a backyard wedding at the home they shared and welcomed 3 sons, aged 10, 9, and 6 today. Eric was a coach or assistant coach on all of his son's sports teams. He was known to be very involved and dedicated to the teams that he worked with. Corey was Eric's second wife. He'd been previously married to Julie Jorgensen, whom he married in 2005. There's not much information about this marriage, but they divorced in 2009, and Julie passed away in 2011. Eric and Corey signed a pretty tight prenup agreement, which stated that Corey wouldn't get any of Eric's assets in the event of divorce. She would only inherit his estate in the event of his death. From the outside, it appeared that they had a great marriage and a successful life to the outside world. They had a massive home worth $1,100,000 and everything they could want or need. In 2019, Corey started her company, K. Richards Realty, LLC, where she was a real estate agent, and according to her company, she would buy and flip homes. Future findings would show that she was constantly losing money with this venture. Financial records would begin to paint a picture of just how unsuccessful Corey was with money. After Eric's death, it would come out that Eric had talked to his family about wanting a divorce, but he planned to stay in the marriage for the kids. Some reports said that Corey had stated that Eric was having an affair and that she had moved out some of his clothes, but that they had gone to counseling, and things have been well before his death. However, the media and court documents began to paint a different story. It showed that in September 2020, Eric discovered that his wife had racked up a substantial amount of debt with her business and that she had been stealing from him to pay for it. She had stolen excess of $200,000 and charged more than $30,000 to his private credit cards. He also discovered that she had fraudulently borrowed $250,000 using a forged power of attorney. The fraudulent power of attorney had been dated and signed in 2013, but not notarized until 2018. She had also taken money that had been set aside to pay his business taxes. The amount that Corey stole seemed to be never-ending, but ultimately she promised to repay the stolen money back from the accounts. In November 2020, Eric had also decided to put the house and all of his assets into a living trust that his sister, Katie Rickon Benson, is the trustee for, and she was also made the representative for the estate of Eric Richens. It is believed that Eric did this because he felt he could no longer trust his wife. Eric and his business partner had life insurance policies out in each other's names, which is standard practice just so that the other can buy out the estate of the other partner if anything were to happen. It was discovered that in January 2022, Corey changed the beneficiary to herself on Eric's policy. It was something that he discovered and quickly changed it back. Shortly after this incident on Valentine's Day, Eric got violently sick from eating and would express fears to a friend that he thought his wife might be to blame. It is also believed that Corey had 2 life insurance policies taken out in Eric's name without his knowledge, one from 2014 and one from January 2022. The policies where Corey was a sole beneficiary. She had all the information sent to a P.O. box that Eric nor his estate knew about. After his death, she filed death claims on both of these policies and received $1,500,000 directly benefiting from the death of her husband. After Eric's death, Corey would go on living her life, some would think extravagantly. She took her kids on trips and kept living life as usual, but with more money in the bank. Almost a year to the day of Eric's death, on March 7, 2023, Corey published a book called Are You With Me? It was a children's book about a boy who had lost his father and could feel his presence afterward. Covers topics on feeling if someone is with you after they die. A few weeks after the book's release, she was on a local morning news show in Salt Lake City to promote the book. She had seemed cold and disconnected, but she credits her son in helping her write the book with her. She said that it was written to help them understand that her husband is with them even if he wasn't there. She wrote it as a comfort to her sons and others experiencing the loss of a loved one. She dedicated the book to her husband, saying, quote, "To my amazing husband and wonderful father." The book is no longer available on Amazon. On May 8, 2023, Corey was arrested and charged with aggravated murder and 3 counts of possession of a controlled substance with intent to distribute. The following is the prosecution and the state of Eric Richens' belief of the events that led to his death and after. On May 2, 2023, the police interviewed a woman only disclosed as CL. At this time, her full name is being held for privacy. She's a known acquaintance of Corey Richens, who had previously cleaned her house and some of the properties Corey was flipping. CL is also known to have past charges of possession of a controlled substance with intent to distribute. She's not been charged with anything at this time. Between December 2021, February 2022, Corey reached out repeatedly to Seal. Once was asking if she could get pain meds for an investor with back pain. Seal contacted an acquaintance known as Acquaintance 1, who got in contact with a dealer known as Acquaintance 2, and was able to procure hydrocodone pills for Corey, which Corey paid for by leaving money for Seal at a house that she owned at the time. 2 weeks later, Corey asked Seal to get something more potent like, quote, that Michael Jackson stuff. She then asked for fentanyl. Seal then contacted the dealer again on February 11, 2022 and got 15 to 30 pills that Corey paid $900 for. She picked them up at Ciel's house. There are 2 reports of what happened on Valentine's Day 2022. In one document, Eric ate a sandwich that Corey had left on the seat of his truck with a love note. After eating it, Eric immediately got hives and had difficulty breathing. The other account, which is the arrest warrant, said that Corey and Eric were having dinner at their home when Eric got very ill after dinner and believed that he'd been poisoned. In both of these options, it was reported that Eric contacted a friend and said he believed his wife was trying to poison him. There's no evidence that Eric acted against his wife on this belief. Almost 2 weeks after Valentine's Day, on February 26, 2022, Corey contacted Seal again, asking for another $900 of fentanyl, which Seal procured and left in a fire pit at another house connected to Corey. 6 days later, Eric Richens died of a fentanyl overdose. Another piece of evidence was that on the night that Eric died, Corey had stated that she left her phone in the bedroom when she went to sleep with her son. However, the data on her phone showed that it was open and moved multiple times between 10:30 p.m. and 3:20 a.m., including at 3 o'clock and 8 seconds p.m. when the phone was moved more than 250 feet. An expert at Corey's bail hearing stated that it could have been a device connected to the phone that caused the pings. For example, a smartwatch. There was also evidence that Corey had messaged someone several times during the time she was supposed to be sleeping. Those text messages had been deleted and never recovered. It is also stated that the person who received the messages had also deleted them. That person's name has been kept out of the media and court records. Corey also said in her original statement that she had performed CPR on her husband. Still, when EMS arrived and started to perform CPR, Eric began to foam at the mouth, which was an indicator that no one had tried to perform CPR previously. Corey later texted her best friend saying, quote, "I pumped so damn hard, so hard," screaming at him to come back to life. After Corey's first phone was taken into evidence, she got a new phone which was later taken into evidence. This phone had some disturbing web searches in its history, which included, can you delete everything in an iCloud account? Can you delete text messages to be retrieved from an iPhone? Can cops uncover deleted messages iPhone? How to permanently delete information from an iPhone remotely? Can cops force you to do a lie detector test? What are you allowed inside Utah jails? Will life insurance pay if death certificate says pending? Luxury prisons for the rich in America. If someone is poisoned, what does it go down on a death certificate as? FBI analysis of electronics in an investigation. Can FBI find deleted messages? What does FBI do with electronics for searches? Can the cause of death be changed on the death certificate? What is considered a lethal dose of fentanyl? Before being arrested, investigators had asked Corey if she'd taken any vacations. She responded in an email, quote, "You asked about any exotic vacations I have taken since Eric's passing. I went on 2 trips last year. 1, my kids tried out for a soccer camp in Salt Lake City to qualify to play in Spain in June, and both my kids made it. So yes, I took them to Spain in October 2022. I've attached their invitation letters." Another message read, quote, "I took my kids and my mom came with us in August of 2022 to Mexico. As I hope you understand, the months prior to this since Eric's death have been hard to deal with." She also went on to talk about how she and Eric went to Mexico every year and that they hadn't gone this year because Eric went on a hunting trip in January instead. On June 12, 2023, Corey Richens had her bail hearing. She could be seen in a white blouse and dress pants and handcuffed in the courtroom. She had been wiping her eyes with no visible tears and seemed sad while evidence was given, and she was held without bail and awaiting trial. Eric's sister, Amy, gave this impact statement.
Dear Judge Mrazek, I'm here today to represent my brother, Eric Eugene Richens, whose life was taken in a senseless act of poisoning on March 3rd, 2022. His wife, the defendant, has been accused of committing this crime. If she is found guilty, she has committed the ultimate act of betrayal. Eric is gone, and I am brokenhearted. He was my best friend and protector. The feeling of loss is so great it is visceral. And with the sorrow comes a wave of panic at not being able to see him again. I can never talk to him, never hug him again, and never more be a part of his life. Eric's world revolved around his family, his love for hunting, the family cattle ranch, and his intense drive as a successful entrepreneur. Being born into the Richens legacy shaped Eric's formative years and resulted in a lifetime of hard work, dedication, and fierce loyalty. At an early age, Eric learned the joys of keeping horses and cows around. He spent countless hours helping our dad work the ranch, hauling hay, feeding the animals, and mending fences. He loved our family unconditionally and was a devoted son, brother, uncle, and father. Eric was a family man who always strove to be the absolute best father and husband. He was an attentive and loving father to his 3 sons and a devoted husband to his wife of almost 9 years, Corey, the defendant. Eric did absolutely everything in his power to provide his family and his 3 sons with every possible opportunity to learn, grow, and have fun. He was the coach or assistant coach on all his boys' teams, which included soccer, basketball, and baseball. He spent countless hours coaching and teaching the boys to play aggressive and give it their all. Eric truly cared about every single child he coached and wanted the absolute best for all of them. There was never a dull moment when you were around Eric, whether it was him showing up to a family dinner with no socks or the sleeves torn off of his shirt because he had to make an emergency bathroom stop along the way, or his calling to tell you he rolled the 4-wheeler for the upteenth time is stuck and he needs you to come get him. It was never boring. Eric loved to have fun and always wanted to make sure everyone else did as well. He owned almost every motorized toy possible, from 4-wheelers and side-by-sides to trucks and snowmobiles, and was so excited to share those with his sons. He had the perfect combination of business sense and foresight. He built a very successful masonry business from the ground up and helped many friends do the same. He had a special ability to build close relationships with everyone he worked with, which really allowed his business to thrive. Eric loved every aspect of his job, but most of all, he loved the people he worked for and those he worked with. Eric faithfully supported organizations that he truly believed in. He never was one that wanted recognition or accolades. He did most things anonymously and without recognition. Eric was a true champion of all people. It did not matter if you were an employee, friend, family, or the next random person walking down the street. If you needed anything, you could count on him. He truly cared about each person he met. Eric loved fully, laughed loudly, and lived life with reckless abandon. He enjoyed great adventures to far-off places, but also cherished the small and finer things in life. No obstacle was too great for Eric. He simply viewed each one as a challenge. No peak was too high, and the next adventure was always just around the next bend. Words cannot describe the loneliness and loss that is felt in every heart that was lucky enough to know him. Eric was such an inspiration and role model for us all. His loss has created a Grand Canyon-sized hole in this community. Except instead of taking millions of years to slowly form, our worlds change overnight. His 3 boys' entire worlds and their perspectives on life changed. None of our lives will ever be the same. Eric died under horrendous circumstances. I am tormented at the thought of what he endured. I play it out in my mind. I go through the terrible sequence of events. I wonder when he realized he was in mortal danger. I wonder what Corey may have said to him in his last moments. How long was he conscious, knowing he would die? Where were Eric's boys when all of this happened? Did they hear Eric's body fall to the ground? Did they catch a glimpse of their father taking his last breath? It's torture to think of. Why did Eric lose his life? Why did the boys lose their father? Was it because of Corey's greed and desire to get life insurance and other assets? If so, that is abhorrent. How could anyone value human life so cheaply? I cannot comprehend it. I'm overflowing with grief and pain at the thought that Eric meant so little to her. If Eric had died because of an illness, he would have been cared for. He could have looked after him and been with him. If he had died because of an accident, people would have tried to help. There would have been kindness. But there's no comfort to be had here. There's no consoling thought in the way Eric died. In his last moments, after being intentionally poisoned, he was faced with betrayal and terror. The thought of it is unbearable. I am haunted by the horror of it. This last year has been a living hell for our family. We have watched as Corey has paraded around portraying herself as a grieving widow and victim while trying to profit from the death of my brother. Both by trying to profit from a book about his death and trying to get life insurance and assets that should go exactly where Eric wanted them to his boys. Immediately after Eric was killed, Corey told us she could not help us get anything ready for the funeral as she was too distraught with grief. We shortly found out that was not true at all. In fact, she pulled herself together enough to go close on the purchase of a $2 million home, hire a real estate agent, hire an architect to create CAD drawings of the home, hire a lawyer in order to file a lawsuit on Eric's trust, hire a locksmith to come break into and clean out my brother's safe, and attempt to have Eric cremated. She mustered up the strength and resolve to do most of this within 48 hours of his death. Corey assaulted me. I will never forget the look in her eyes when she attacked me that Sunday morning. It was early and had been snowing most of the night. I was just getting ready to leave and heading out to the car when I saw a locksmith in Eric's detached garage starting to drill out his gun safe. I asked Corey multiple times why we could not just call my dad for the code. I could not understand why she was breaking into and ruining Eric's safe. To this, she screamed at me at the top of her lungs, called me some inappropriate things I cannot share with you here, and then told me to get out of her house. It was then that I told her that she could not kick me out of my brother's house. My sister Katie was now the executor of Eric's trust and estate, and just like Eric, she would not want the defendant breaking into his gun safe. Corey looked at me with pure hatred and rage. I was messing up her plan. I was getting in her way, and because of that, she attacked me. She punched me in the face and neck multiple times. It took 4 people to pull her off me that day. Before the funeral, Corey opened a bank account and asked everyone that was grieving to send her money instead of sending the family cards and flowers. It was not even 2 weeks after Eric's passing that we were told she had taken down all but one photo of my brother and removed all his clothing from the house. Corey put together a golf tournament in Eric's name 2 months after his death on what would have been his 40th birthday and told his family, all of us, that we were not allowed to attend. Since Eric's death, it has come to our attention that Corey took out multiple life insurance policies on Eric without his knowledge. It appears that she forged his signature on various documents, assigned herself as Eric's durable power of attorney, inappropriately diverted money from his business to herself, and assigned herself as beneficiary of Eric's portion of our mother's retirement account. I should also not forget to mention the multiple life insurances she has taken out on the boys. Her most recent business venture was authoring a children's book about how to help grieving children cope with the loss of the death of a parent. In this book, she had the audacity to use the boys' real names and even use their last family portrait. Her behavior gives me great concern, as she has exploited the boys for money and will likely do so again. In addition, Corey has weaponized Eric's children, manipulating my dad to do or not do things by threatening to cut him out of their lives if he did not capitulate to her demands. She similarly deprived the boys of contact with myself, my sister, and her daughters, unless we agreed to give her the money in Eric's trust. Money that Eric wanted to go to his 3 children. As if that were not enough, I have been told that Corey started telling their 3 little boys that none of Eric's family or friends loved them. She apparently told them none of us cared for them or wanted to be around them, even though that is the exact opposite of what was happening. We all want nothing more than to be there for those 3 little boys, my nephews, yet Corey has made sure to cut us out of every aspect of their lives. This is all just a brief summary and the start of what our family has been through over the last year. We have scarcely gone a day without finding out some new allegations or evidence regarding something Corey appears to have maliciously done to attack and undermine my brother, his 3 little boys, and our family. We have all been there since the beginning of Corey's and Eric's relationship. I was there on one of their first dates. We were there at the wedding. We were there when each of the boys were born. We have been there for every birthday party, school graduation, and rodeo. We welcomed her into our family and treated her as one of us. Not only did she betray our brother, it feels as though she has murdered and taken away a part of our souls as well. Because of her actions, there has not been a day that has gone by we have not lived with paralyzing anxiety and fear, worrying for the boys' lives as well as our own. I may be naive, but I never knew evil like this existed. If Corey was in fact willing to kill Eric for money, who's to say that what she will not do? Who would be next? Corey was in a desperate financial situation when Eric was killed, and that situation seems even worse now. We understand that she has defaulted on loans and is already a defendant in other lawsuits based on her financial misdeeds. I am truly concerned that she will stop at nothing to dig her way out of the problems, including murder. She seems devoid of moral sensibility, and there is no telling what she will do if she is released. Judge Mrazek, her fate lies in your hands. Please do not allow Corey to use the fraudulent life insurance proceeds to get out on bail. That would be morally reprehensible. Please do not allow Corey to take advantage and make a mockery of our justice and legal system anymore. She has done enough. Please do not allow Corey to hurt Eric's memory, our family, friends, and community anymore. We have been through enough. Please do not give Corey the opportunity to hurt Eric's 3 boys anymore. They have lost enough and have been through enough. Since Eric's death, we have learned and unfortunately are continually reminded that Corey is desperate, greedy, and extremely manipulative. If she gets out on bail, I will be afraid not only for my own life and those of all of my family, but most importantly for the lives of Eric's 3 sons. Our family has already suffered enough. Please do not let Corey out on bail where she will be a risk to do further harm. Please protect what Eric put his life on the line for. His 3 boys.
In June, Corey filed a lawsuit suing the estate of Eric Richens for $2 million and the house that they shared. Eric bought the house in 2012 before they got married without Corey and never added her name to the house. He had also added the house to his living trust in 2020. Also on June 27, 2023, Eric's sister, Katie Rickon Benson, filed a lawsuit suing Corey in civil court on behalf of the living trust and the estate of Eric Richens and was asking for $13 million. That case states that Corey is responsible for the death of Eric and should not have profited from his death. Also, Corey had stolen property from the estate, including money from a safe, vehicles that had belonged to Eric, and some off-road vehicles. The civil case also includes the book that Corey wrote, saying it is an unlawful book and that she used Eric's name and likeness without permission for the book. Eric's family has also stated that they believe Corey is the only one who could have killed Eric and he had no history of drugs. Corey herself also said that he didn't do drugs. Corey seems to have calculated how to kill her husband and worked hard to profit from his death. For the murder charge alone, Corey faces 25 to life in prison if convicted. Corey has maintained her innocence during every stage of this investigation. So far, Corey has not been found guilty, and no trial date has been set yet, but it will likely be in 2024. The criminal and civil trial are still ongoing and are currently being investigated. If you would like me to cover this case moving forward or the trial to come, let me know down below. Before we dive in, don't forget to subscribe to our new channel, where we uncover captivating and chilling cold cases that will keep you on the edge of your seat. You won't want to miss the twists and turns we have in store. On December 14, 2005, Yasser Macias and his wife, Rosalia Lopez Martinez, welcomed their first child, a son named Salvador, at the Mexican Social Security Institute 45 clinic in Guadalajara. However, the joy of the day quickly turned to tragedy just hours after Salvador's birth. A woman, whom the couple believed to be a nurse, entered their hospital room and asked if the newborn had been fed. Later, she returned, instructing Yasser to leave the building, saying that visiting hours were over. She then approached Rosalia, stating she needed to take the baby to another room to be fed. But the woman, who was not actually a nurse, never returned with Salvador. Instead, she left the hospital, abducting the newborn. The official search for Salvador continued for months without success. Despite the lack of progress, his parents never gave up hope. Although officials eventually informed them that the case was no longer being actively investigated, the couple's determination to find their son remained unwavering. They went on to have 2 more children and were determined that they would one day meet their older brother. Salvador's case received renewed public interest in August of 2021 when another newborn was kidnapped from a hospital close to the one where Salvador was born under similar circumstances. Unlike Salvador's case, this case was quickly resolved when the abducted baby was found abandoned in the stairway of a nearby apartment building. The woman who kidnapped the baby, however, remained unidentified. The renewed interest in cases of infant abductions from hospitals led to the Jalisco Institute of Forensic Sciences generating an image of what Salvador Macias may have looked like as a teenager. This image was released to the public and resulted in the tip that finally led to Salvador's disappearance being solved. A tipster called in, reporting that a teenager who resembled the image was living in El Salto with a couple claiming to be his parents. They were able to provide important information about the teenager as well as pictures. Investigators spent months following up on this lead, and DNA tests ultimately confirmed that this young man was Rosalia and Yasser's biological son. On February 17, 2022, the couple was reunited with their now 16-year-old son. Neighbors described the young man, now known to be Salvador Macias, as a polite and kind teenager who had lots of friends and never said anything rude. The man and woman they believed to be his parents were also polite and considerate. They never suspected that there was anything unusual about the family. The couple, Salvador grew up believing to be his parents, reportedly left home, leaving Salvador alone. The day before, authorities came to bring him back to his biological parents. There was a sighting of the woman acting as his mother at a neighborhood grocery store with several suitcases. This woman is yet to be located and questioned by authorities. Salvador Bernal, the man who she lived with, has come forward and been questioned. He claims to have not known that the baby he had believed to be his own had been kidnapped. He says his partner did not allow him to be an active part of her pregnancy or allow him to attend any ultrasound appointments. However, he did not question that she had given birth to his son when she returned home with a baby in December of 2005. So far, the woman remains at large and no criminal charges have been filed. Salvador's parents have stated that they cannot describe in words how happy they are to have finally found their son. In 2021, 37-year-old Li Jingwei was a father of 2 living in the Hunan province of China. This was not the location of his birth, however. Jingwei could not remember the name of the village where he had been born, the names of his parents, or his own birth name because he had been the victim of child trafficking. When Jingwei was just 4 years old, one of his neighbors lured him away from his home with the promise of taking him to see some cars. While Jingwei did not remember the name of the village, he did remember that it was very remote, and cars were not a common sight, so he went with the neighbor. The neighbor took the little boy to a road behind a hill where 4 other men were waiting with bicycles. Jingwei burst into tears. He was placed on one of the bikes and taken away from the village. He begged to go home, but his abductors refused to take him back. Within a few hours, the little boy realized that these were bad men, and he would not be able to make it back home. Jingwei remembers being given new clothes and taken onto a train by a couple in their 40s. They rode the train for a full day and night. He was eventually sold to a family in the Hunan province who raised him as their son and treated him well. Jingwei did not remember the name of his village, but he remembered what it looked like. Over the following several years, whenever he felt homesick or sad, he would obsessively draw maps of the village. Before he was old enough to attend school, He would etch the map into the dirt with sticks, and when he was older, he would draw the map on pages of his notebooks at school. He spent years drawing the map every single day. It would be this map that would help reunite him with his biological family after more than 3 decades. While the Chinese government acknowledges that child trafficking, generally for the purposes of both domestic and international adoption, is a problem, it does not publicly release statistics about the number of kidnappings that occur in the country each year. The U.S. State Department estimates that approximately 20,000 children are abducted in China every year, with independent estimates being much higher. Abductions of boys are common for domestic adoption, a practice believed to be the result of the high value traditionally placed on having a son in China, now that social media and DNA technology are more accessible. In recent years, there have been several high-profile cases of parents being reunited with their abducted children after decades of separation. It was seeing reports of these reunions that inspired Li Jingwei to search for his own family. He was further spurred into action by the realization that his mother and father would be getting older and could pass away before he found them. Since he could not remember details like his birth name or the name of his village, he could not simply return to the place of his birth and look for his family. After speaking with his adoptive family, he submitted his DNA to a database in hopes of finding his biological family. While it did not immediately identify his family specifically, it did give him a general idea of where he was most likely born. To help identify the exact village where he was from, volunteers Jingwei had been consulting with suggested that he make a post on social media featuring the map he had drawn thousands of times as a child and could still draw from memory. He did make such a video featuring the map and his story and shared it on the Chinese social media platform Douyin. The video was viewed tens of thousands of times within days of it being posted, and Jingwei received additional help from the Ministry of Public Security. The village in Jingwei's map was identified as one near Gaodong in the province of Yunnan, 1,000 miles away from where he lived with his adoptive family. There was a woman there looking for her missing son, who would be the same age as Jingwei and had gone missing around the time he believed his abduction occurred. Jingwei first spoke to this woman over the phone, and she asked him if he had a scar on his chin, which he did. A DNA test soon confirmed that this woman was, in fact, Jingwei's mother. They then spoke over a video chat, and Jingwei was shocked to see that they shared so many physical features, like their mouth and their teeth. He remembered his father's face well enough to know that they had similar foreheads and eyes. On January 1, 2022, Jingwei was finally reunited with his family at a police station in Hunan. Overcome with emotion, he collapsed at his mother's feet when he first saw her and needed help from his brother and sister to stand and hug her. Both he and his mother were in tears, and she cried out, "I finally found my baby." Jingwei's father passed away before he was able to find his son. Jingwei planned to spend the upcoming Lunar New Year holiday, bringing his own children to visit his father's grave in Yunnan and be reunited with his extended family. Janice Bullock was the mother of 4 children. After she and her husband divorced, the children remained with him, although court hearings involving the custody of the children were ongoing. Janice's children last saw her in 1974 and last heard from her in 1976 when she sent them a letter. In 1977, Janice was served with a subpoena, ordering her to appear in court for a custody hearing in Harrison County, Mississippi. When she was served with a subpoena, she was County, Mississippi. When she was served with a subpoena, she was in Pearl River County, Mississippi. Authorities know she received the subpoena because she signed for it when she was served. However, Janice failed to show up for the court date, and her ex-husband was given full custody of their children. Later investigation would find that Janice had remained in Pearl River County for a time and worked as a waitress at Dickey's truck stop located on Highway 26 in Poplarville. After 1978, however, there was no record of her there. In a potentially concerning coincidence, around the time Janice was working at the truck stop, its owner killed his girlfriend and then himself. Janice's children began looking for her when they became adults, with their search efforts escalating in 2011. They submitted samples of their DNA and filed a report with the National Missing Persons Program. The program contacted the Harrison County Sheriff's Office in 2017 and they began their own investigation into Janice's disappearance. Once they were able to confirm that she had signed for the 1977 subpoena in Pearl River County, which was the last time they had any official record of her, they turned the case over to the Pearl River County Sheriff's Department in 2019. They subsequently determined that the last sighting of her was in 1978 when she was working at the truck stop. Her name and other identifying information had not been used since this time. Investigators followed up with known associates of Janice's, but none of them were able to provide solid leads. Then in December of 2021, a woman who had seen Janice's missing persons poster called in a tip that Janice had been working as a waitress in Raceland, Louisiana in the late 1970s or early 1980s. Authorities tracked down other individuals who had worked at the same diner around the same time, and while they remembered a woman who could have been Janice working there, they had not kept in contact with her and knew nothing of her current whereabouts. Mississippi Coast Crime Stoppers then shared a post about the case, which prompted another tip to come in. The individual who came forward knew a man, who was by then deceased, whose wife looked like Janice. She had been living under a different name, however. The couple's son was a man named David Streety, who was living in Goldwaith, Texas. An examination of his Facebook profile found photographs of a woman who bore a strong physical resemblance to Janice. In February of 2022, investigators traveled to Texas to meet with David, who told them that his mother was receiving care at a Fort Worth nursing home. The investigators then went to Fort Worth to meet with David's mother and confirmed that she was Janice Bullock. She had been living under her current alias since 1980. As if learning his mother was not who he believed her to be was not enough to process, Janice's son David also learned at this time that he was not his parents' biological child, as he had previously believed. Janice and the husband she had, while living under an assumed name, allegedly purchased David from his biological family for $1,000 when he was an infant. There are no formal records of his adoption. According to David, he had a good childhood and never had any reason to suspect he was not his parents' biological son. His mother always said she had no living relatives when asked about her family. Despite the shock he feels at the situation and how upset he is with her, David says he still loves his mother. He plans to submit his DNA to 23andMe in hopes of finding his biological family and getting a better understanding of the circumstances of his adoption. He also wants to meet Janice's 4 children from her first marriage. One of those children, Lynette, has spoken to her mother following her identification. She has not publicly spoken about the resolution to the case in great detail. She has stated that her mother is ill without specifying what illness she has and thanked investigators for their hard work, which finally brought her family answers. It's just so early. We've been looking for her for over 40 years. We're all in shock still, she told the Picayune Item. On the evening of May 30th, 2012, 19-year-old Brittany would dressed up and left her mother's home in Mobile, Alabama, sometime between 7 and 7:30 p.m. Everyone assumed Brittany was going to visit a friend, but the reality was far different. Unbeknownst to her family, Brittany's actual destination was her uncle, Donnie Holland's home. What began as a seemingly ordinary visit would soon spiral into a nightmare for both her family and law enforcement. 2 days later, on June 1st, 2012, police made a gruesome discovery. Donnie, Brittany's uncle, was found dead in his car with a gunshot wound to the back of his head, creating a chilling crime scene. The bloody, shocking scene added a layer of mystery to the case. Intensifying the situation further, Brittany would remain mysteriously missing. Did Brittany have a role in Donnie's death? And if so, what drove her to such actions? Or was it someone else who not only killed Donnie, but also kidnapped Brittany? Brittany always had a dream of becoming a hairdresser and opening her salon one day. However, the young girl just in her teenage years would come across a man named Andy Woods. Their connection blossomed, leading to the joyous arrival of their beautiful daughter, Peyton, in 2009 when Brittany was just 18. While initially relishing the freedom of youth, the birth of Peyton signaled a profound change in Brittany's life. However, her life took an even more significant turn when just a few months after Peyton's birth, Amy and Brittany parted ways. Despite the breakup, the two made the decision to share custody, maintaining a positive and amicable relationship for the well-being of their daughter. Subsequently, Brittany ventured into dating, encountering several relationships that proved short-lived. Brittany found joy in spending time with her family, particularly her brother, Derek, whom she considered as her protector. Reflecting on her past, Brittany's tumultuous experiences were also rooted during her childhood days. Her father, Wallace Hankey, had divorced her mother, Chassie Wood, when she was just a baby. Despite the divorce, Brittany maintained a positive relationship with her father. However, the main complication arose in her connection with her uncle, Donnie Holland. Donnie seemed like a fun-loving guy to everyone, always nice to those around him. However, beneath the surface, his story was more complex than it appeared. At the time of his death, Donnie was actually under investigation for his alleged involvement in a child abuse ring, which extended to include other family members, even reaching members of Brittany's household. Now, is there a connection between everything that transpired in the past leading to the ultimate death of Donnie and Brittany's disappearance? On the evening of May 30th, 2012, Brittany left her house around 7:30 p.m. with her family assuming she was visiting a friend. Despite attempts to contact her later that night, they couldn't reach Brittany. The family, accustomed to her spending days with her friends, didn't initially suspect anything was amiss. However, unbeknownst to them, this was not just one of those nights. As Brittany's whereabouts remain unknown, a chilling revelation awaited the family 2 days later on June 1st, 2012. Donnie Holland, Brittany's uncle, was found in his car with the engine still running, left in a secluded area overlooking the Fish River. He had a gunshot wound to the back of his head behind his ear. He was transported to a local hospital but had passed away. Upon learning this distressing news, Brittany's family attempted once more to contact her and share the tragic information. Unfortunately, their attempts were in vain as her phone remained unresponsive, indicating that it was dead. When they were unable to locate Brittany at her usual hangouts, the family grew increasingly concerned. In response, they swiftly headed to the Mobile County Police Station and filed a missing person report. This set off a series of investigations encompassing both Donnie and Brittany. Now at the crime scene, the police conducted an exhaustive search for any evidence that could swiftly solve the case. Their thorough sweep revealed a small gun and a phone battery inside the car. While at the hospital, Brittany's mother, Chessie, mentioned that bags had been placed on Donnie's hands, presumably later for testing for gunshot residue. However, it remains unclear why these bags were removed without undergoing testing. In addition to the investigation, the police interviewed Donnie's wife, Wendy Holland, and their friend, Jennifer Gonzalez Moore, the individuals who discovered Donnie's body. They reported that Donnie was still gurgling blood when found approximately a mile away from the main road. The specifics of the interrogation, including whether Donnie was alive or not and the reason for their search, remain undisclosed. However, there was a significant suspicion that Wendy might be somehow connected to this incident. The police gathered the phone battery and the gun, presuming it to be the weapon used to shoot Donnie. However, surprising turn of events occurred when Brittany's best friend, Tiffany Bailey, confirmed that the gun belonged to Brittany. Tiffany revealed that Brittany had purchased the gun for protection shortly before her disappearance. With suspicions running high, questions arose about whether Wendy and her friend were involved or if Brittany played a role. However, another perspective on the story was yet to be explored. At the time of his death, Donnie was under investigation for his alleged participation in a troubling child abuse ring that implicated several of his own family members. A mere 30 minutes before his scheduled meeting with the investigators to discuss these allegations, he succumbed to a fatal gunshot while seated in his vehicle. Eric Winberg, a former detective with the Baldwin County Sheriff's Office, posited the belief that Donnie likely anticipated arrest and, as a result, took his own life shortly before the planned police meeting. Amidst the suspicions and assumptions, the quest for truth began. The investigation was initiated by scrutinizing phone records. It was revealed that the battery found in Donnie's car belonged to Brittany's cell phone. Furthermore, the call records confirmed that Donnie and Brittany did, in fact, meet on May 30th, 2012, the day she went missing. Records revealed that Donnie had picked up Brittany at her home in Mobile and drove her to the residence in the Styx River area. Brittany's text records revealed continuous messaging until 11:30 p.m., abruptly ceasing at that point. In the early hours of May 31st, they returned to mobile, coinciding with the moment her phone ceased functioning, preventing any further data collection. Healed by these revelations, the police force took drastic measures in their pursuit of Brittany. A widespread search ensued, mobilizing volunteers, the search and rescue unit, helicopters, dogs, and boats. The operation spanned a 5-mile radius around the Styx River Basin, the last location where Brittany's phone had pinged. Despite numerous interviews with her friends and family, the exhaustive efforts yielded no trace of her whereabouts. Meanwhile, Brittany's daughter also longed to see her mother. However, faced with a failed search for Brittany, the focus shifted back to Wendy. Police noted that on the day Donnie was discovered dead, Wendy was observed deleting items from Donnie's phone, suggesting an attempt to conceal something. Initially overlooked, this action gained significance as the investigation hit a dead end, prompting the police to turn their attention back to Wendy. The DNA results from the car yielded no conclusive evidence, and the case reached a standstill. Soon, no further evidence surfaced to link anyone to the murder of Donnie Holland. Consequently, the case was closed, officially declaring it as a suicide. The decision to close the case as a suicide sparked controversy and raised many questions. Becca Johnson, a private investigator actively involved in the search for Brittany, would express skepticism, stating, "Generally, it's 4 to 5 hours till unpreserved gunshot residue is gone. And, hands and bags, it's being preserved. So I don't understand why that wasn't done, even if they thought it was an apparent suicide." Detective Eric Winberg confirmed that the gunshot residue test was not conducted because it was a procedure performed by the Alabama Department of Forensic Sciences at that particular time. Firearms expert Cameron Busey pointed out that the brain matter and bone fragments would likely have embedded into Donnie's hands if he had shot himself. However, no test was conducted to determine this aspect as well. Moreover, USI highlighted that placing the gun behind one's head would be highly unusual. I don't know of any suicide that was done in that position. However, despite various concerns and observations, the cause of death was officially determined as suicide, and no concrete evidence emerged to challenge this conclusion. Although the case of Donnie concluded unexpectedly, the investigation delved deeper into unraveling its complexities as they explored the possibility of a family member being involved in the crime. The investigations exposed a disturbing history that the family had been hiding for years. They found that Donnie Holland headed a child abuse ring with the involvement of at least 11 other family members or friends. They had been abusing and exploiting children, including their own, for decades. As the police examined Brittany's Facebook profile, they discovered additional evidence linking the family to these accusations. Donnie's wife, Wendy, and Brittany's beloved brother, Derek, were among the 11 family members arrested for their involvement in the abuse ring. Adding to the gravity of the situation, Nace's mother, Jessie, faced charges of child abuse despite maintaining her innocence. The allegations against the mother included an assault on another underage female relative. As the inquiry progressed, information from Brittany's friends to whom she had confided surfaced. It was disclosed that Brittany herself had been a victim of Donnie's abuse when she was just 9 years old. According to her friends, Brittany had intentions of confronting Donnie and exposing him to the authorities. The revelation raised a significant question. Did Brittany kill Donnie out of revenge while the hypothesis had a compelling backstory? The absence of concrete evidence made it purely speculative. In a simpler narrative or a motive, it might have been the audience's initial thought that Brittany was responsible for Donnie's death, considering the backstory and her subsequent disappearance, especially with her gun found. However, in legal procedures, evidence is paramount, and without sufficient proof, no further investigation into her involvement was pursued. Alongside the theory of Brittany seeking revenge, another hypothesis emerged. Could a past victim have killed Donnie out of revenge and subsequently kidnapped Brittany? The motive behind kidnapping Brittany remained unclear, but her unexplained disappearance prompted questions about whether she was still alive. While various hypotheses circulated, the undeniable fact was that Brittany's family was on the verge of facing the legal consequences. Nevertheless, Chessie, Brittany's mother, expressed frustration that her daughter had not been located yet. On December 9, 2014, a young victim testified against Donnie's wife, Wendy Holland, in court. The testimony included the harrowing account of the victim's earliest memories involving abuse by adult relatives, one of whom was the defendant, Wendy Wood Holland, who was 35 at the time. During the largest case in Alabama, which involved the prosecution of 10 individuals, the teen girl testified that the relatives often engaged in adult group activities, mentioning that Brittany Wood was sometimes involved in these activities. Prosecutor Teresa Hines asked how often such things occurred. "It happened a bunch," she replied. A man who later pleaded guilty testified that he once participated in a 6-way inappropriate encounter with a group of relatives, including the girl and Wendy Holland. Brittany Wood's 23-year-old brother, Derek Wood, pleaded guilty to engaging in inappropriate activities with the victim in Wendy Holland's case. He mentioned that he had such inappropriate interactions with Wendy too many times to count, starting at around the age of 13. Derek received youthful offender status for his case, which was sealed, and he spent 3 years incarcerated. Brittany's mother, Chessie Wood, who also faced charges related to a child abuse crime, arrived at court with her son, but was not allowed inside as she is a defendant in a related case. Moreover, she directly stated that her family members were guilty. Wendy Holland's brother-in-law, Dustin Kent, testified that he took part in a 6-way inappropriate encounter involving Wendy, the alleged teen victim, and his wife, Mindy Kent, who is Wendy Holland's twin sister. Dustin Kent, who also pleaded guilty to sex charges, stated he first witnessed Wendy Holland engaging in inappropriate activities with the alleged victim in October 2011. A week after entering the guilty plea, Dustin Kent pleaded guilty again in Mobile County, this time for charges of sodomy and assault related to engaging in inappropriate activities with 2 different 13-year-old family members in 2008. He was sentenced to 17 years in prison. Subsequently, Randall Scott Wood, another uncle of Brittany, entered a guilty plea in Mobile County. In succession, each of the accused individuals was convicted on charges related to child abuse. Mindy Kent, Wendy's identical twin sister, also landed behind bars after Mobile County jurors convicted her of sodomy and abuse of a child under the age of 12 in 2015. She was sentenced to a maximum sentence of 40 years behind bars, 20 years for each count against her. In 2015, Wendy Holland was convicted of child abuse and child torture, receiving a staggering sentence of 219 years in prison. Brittany's mother, Chessie Wood, also admitted guilt to a misdemeanor charge and child endangerment. The conclusion of Donnie Holland's death as a suicide continues to be shrouded in controversy. The significant question of whether Brittany was the perpetrator remains unanswered definitively. However, beneath this veil, one certainty prevails. The troubled family of Brittany would face the consequences they deserved. After concealing these taboo activities for ages, justice ultimately had prevailed. Now, concerning the disappearance or the night of the murder, only one person can tell us the truth: Brittany Wood herself. However, more than a decade has passed, and she remains elusive with her whereabouts still unknown. So, what do you think about this disturbing case? What could have happened on the night of Donnie's death? Was it really a disappearance and a suicide? Or was there something more twisted? Let us know your opinions. We'd love to hear from you. It was in 1973 when 23-year-old Althea Dale Blankinship and her 4-year-old son, Jeffrey, moved to Port Townsend close to the Puget Sound in Washington. Althea had spent her early life in Virginia before moving to Washington with her family. She graduated from Shoreline High School, Washington in 1967, and 2 years later her son Jeffrey was born. Althea had set her sights on creating a better life for the pair. Contemporary news articles do not mention whether Jeffrey's father was in the picture, and it appears he has never been named publicly. After spending a few years in Shoreline, Althea decided to move 50 miles to Port Townsend, Washington. Althea's parents, Oscar and Mary Marks, owned a home in Port Townsend, and she wanted herself and her son to be closer to her parents. The move was a breath of fresh air for the two, and they rented a room from Glenn Allen Bagley. According to local news reports, Althea and Glenn developed a romantic interest in one another. Unfortunately, little is known about Althea's time in Port Townsend. We do know that at the time, Glenn Bagley was separated from his wife, Esther Mae Gessler. Just 3 years after Althea and Jeffrey were last seen, Esther, too, would disappear. She was last seen in Auburn, Washington on March 13, 1976, leaving home in her blue Mercury station wagon. By 1976, Esther had remarried and was training to become a paralegal. On the day that Esther disappeared, she told her second husband that she was going to rent a hotel room so she could be alone to study. While the disappearance of Esther and Althea have never been officially connected, it is hard to ignore the striking similarities. Althea and her son Jeffrey were last seen on March 27, 1973, at or close to the apartment that they shared with Glenn Bagley. That day, Althea and Jeffrey were due to travel to the Seattle-Tacoma International Airport. From there, they had plans to fly to New York City and catch a connecting flight to Greece to meet up with Althea's parents, who were already holidaying there. Unfortunately, Althea and Jeffrey never made it to their flights and have never been seen or heard from again. Glenn is believed to be the last person to have seen the pair alive. He told the Kent Police Department that on March 27th, he dropped Althea and Jeffrey off at the Seattle-Tacoma International Airport, which was the last time he saw them. Investigators doubted his story, but without solid evidence, they were unable to move forward with a conviction. While searching Althea's room, they uncovered letters between the two that exposed their romantic relationship, which had previously been unknown. Following the 1976 disappearance of Esther, authorities ramped up their investigation of him. Glenn soon caught wind of the police attention that he'd garnered and had moved to the Philippines to escape the heat. Glenn Allen Bagley never returned to the United States, passing away in 2016 from cancer. According to the Charlie Project, the Kent Police Department tried to build a case against him for many years, but were always unsuccessful. An ex-girlfriend at Bagley later told investigators that he had not been building a cat house on the day of Esther's disappearance as he had told law enforcement. She refused to tell the police anything else as Glenn had threatened her, telling her, quote, "You will end up in the same culvert in Kinsang as Esther." Searches for Althea, Jeffrey, and Esther have been conducted, but nothing has been found so far. In 1973, burned and charred human remains were discovered on Protection Island, just off of Discovery Bay. Unfortunately, the chain of custody is somewhat murky on these remains, with the Port Townsend leader reporting, quote, "The remains pulled from the island burn pile in 1973 were transferred to the University of Washington's anthropology lab. It was concluded that the University of Washington had no documentation of those remains nor several other associated records from that era." Althea Dale Blankinship is described as a Caucasian female with brown hair, blue eyes, 5'7", and a 135 to a pound 140. Jeffrey Dean Blankinship was described as a white male with brown hair, brown eyes, 3'5" and a pound 75. Anyone with information is asked to contact Detective John Thompson of the Kent Police Department. It was on September 29, 1980, approximately 5 miles from Ashland, Virginia at around 6:30 p.m. when firefighters were attempting to put out a brush fire when they came across the burned remains of a young woman. She was found on a gravel dirt road that would be later named Wesley's Court, just off of what is now Greenwood Church Road, approximately 12 minutes outside of Ashland. The woman was able to be identified quickly through dental records. She was Patricia Eve Giggler. Not much is known about the young woman, but she was 28 years old. She was moving from her hometown in Pottstown, Pennsylvania to live with her brother in Richmond, Virginia. Authorities would discover that she had last been seen on September 29th around 3 p.m. at a Sunoco gas station in Ashland, Virginia. News reports from 1980 stated that she'd been there to get a used car tire. They would also discover her vehicle on the dirt road near the fire. An autopsy was performed and the medical examiner stated that Patricia had died from an upper airways burns due to immolation or death by fire. They said that she had most likely died within seconds of her airways being burned. They also stated that they didn't find any other wounds on her body, as well as no evidence of sexual assault. They could not determine if she had been conscious at the time of her death, and her death was ultimately ruled a homicide. There has been no speculation if the killer had started the fire or it had already been started and just utilized. No suspect has ever been reported to the public. There's no record that Patricia had been married at any point in her life. Her last known occupation had been stated as a waitress on her death certificate. Both of her parents passed away in 2010 and 2012, and they never got to know what happened to their daughter. Patricia was last seen at that gas station, and she'd only been about 30 minutes from Richmond, Virginia. Law enforcement has always been stumped on why she'd been on that road going in the wrong direction when she was last seen on the main road to Richmond. Authorities have never released much about this case, and details for this are significantly lacking. In January 2022, deputies from the Hanover County Sheriff's Department asked the public to come forward with any information regarding the case of Patricia Eve Giggler. 30-year-old Sheila Sue Connor was described as a loving and caring mother to her 8-year-old son, David. Sheila's life hadn't always been easy, with her son telling local news outlets that she'd been subjected to violence from a young age. Despite her challenging beginnings, Sheila was a kind and gentle soul who ensured her son would never have to face the same hardships she did. The two lived together in Houston, Texas, and things were going well for a while. That was until December 31st, 1991. David's only memory of that day was being pulled out of the bath and being told to dry off and put on some clothes as quickly as possible. Houston police officers crouched to his level and told him the devastating news. His beloved mother was missing. At 8 years old, this was hard for David to comprehend, and it took several years for him to be able to process that day entirely. According to reports, Sheila was last seen at Echo Glen Lane at the home of her boyfriend. The man with whom Sheila was in a relationship was much older than her, and her friends and family worried for her safety. Sheila was considerably more vulnerable as she was battling with addiction at the time of her disappearance. The last known contact from Sheila Connor came at 3:30 a.m. when she called a friend from her boyfriend's home in North Houston. She told a friend that she and him had gotten into an argument, and that was the last time anyone ever heard from Sheila. She was reported missing days later. When her missing person investigation began, her car was found abandoned and stripped down along Interstate 45 in New Haven, Texas. Sheila's boyfriend has never been publicly named, but David Connor believes his mother was murdered that night. David now works with the media to ensure his mother's name and story has never been forgotten. Sheila Sue Connor is described as a white female with brown hair, brown eyes, 5 foot, and a pound 130. She has a scar on the right side of her chin and the following tattoos: a leaf on her left leg, a rose on her right breast, and a tattoo on her arm. She was last seen wearing a black jacket, blue jeans, and maybe wearing glasses. Her son is still hopeful that someone with information will come forward and he can finally have some answers. Sunday, May 23, 1982, 2 roommates, 21-year-old Lori Lister and 18-year-old Melinda Aguilar, experienced a terrifying attack in their Houston, Texas apartment. A man seemed to target them with the clear intention of killing them. He tied them up and tried to drown Lori in their apartment bathtub. However, Melinda successfully escaped by pretending to faint and then jumping head first off her balcony. She sought help, and with the assistance of a neighbor, both herself and her roommate were saved. The culprit, 28-year-old Coral Watts, was arrested as he attempted to escape. What no one could have expected was that he was not only involved in just these 2 attempted murders, but was also suspected to have killed close to 100 other women. He confessed to killing 13 women and received a 60-year sentence in 1982. Then, in a shocking twist, in the early 2000s, this man who had committed numerous murders was on the verge of being set free from jail. This was because of a controversial legal ruling that changed his classification to a nonviolent felon. Surprisingly, under Texas law, well-behaved nonviolent felons could deduct 3 days from their sentence for every 1 day served. Watts, a model prisoner, had enough time deducted to potentially be released as early as May 9, 2006. The police, victims' families, and the public were left in utter shock and fear. The lingering questions haunted everyone. Why, against all reason, how could the killer be released? Can there be any conceivable justification for setting free a serial killer responsible for a multitude of deaths? Carl Eugene Watts, known by his nickname, Coral, was born on November 7, 1953 in Killeen, Texas to Richard Eugene Watts and Dorothy Mae Young. His father served as a private first class in the Army, while his mother worked as a kindergarten art teacher. Before Watts turned 2, his parents separated, and after this, he was raised by his mother. They relocated to Inkster, Michigan. And in 1962, Dorothy Mae married a mechanic named Norman Caesar, with whom she had 2 daughters. When he was 8 years old, Watts and his sister battled meningitis. The illness nearly claimed his life, leading him to be held back in school an extra year and causing him to miss the 3rd grade. Herman Kiefer Hospital became Watts' temporary home, where he underwent spinal taps and had to be isolated from other patients. Reports from journalists suggested that Watts' body temperature reached alarming levels, raising concerns about potential brain damage. Following his illness, his family noticed a transformation in his personality. He became bashful, quiet, and introverted with a compromised attention span and a deteriorating memory. Struggling to keep up academically due to being held back a grade and suffering from chronic sleeplessness, Watts began having violent dreams about combating and killing malevolent spirits of women, and these disrupted his sleep cycle. When later questioned about his crimes and why he killed his victims, he explained that he wanted to free their spirits because they possessed evil eyes. At the age of 12, Watts began to relish his sleep-induced fantasies of torturing and killing girls and young women. This was when Watts, who was a teenager, started stalking girls, and it's thought he might have killed his first victim before the age of 15. At 15, Watts was identified by the police as the assailant in the attack on 26-year-old Joan Gave that occurred on July 29, 1969. During his newspaper delivery route, Watts knocked on Joan's apartment door and violently assaulted her when she opened it. Without showing any remorse, he continued with his delivery route as if nothing had transpired. Joan contacted the authorities and promptly reported the incident, leading to Correll's arrest at his home. Subsequently, he was mandated to undergo psychiatric treatment at the Lafayette Clinic in Detroit, a mental hospital. A psychiatric evaluation revealed mild intellectual disability with a full-scale IQ of 75 and a delusional thought process. Despite his poor academic performance, a police officer later described him as very, very intelligent with an excellent memory. Watts was released from the Lafayette Clinic on November 7, 1969. Despite academic struggles, Watts graduated from high school in 1973 and earned a football scholarship to Lane College in Jackson, Tennessee. However, he was expelled after 3 months due to allegations of stalking and assaulting women. Additionally, suspicion surrounded Watts in the cruel murder of a female student, contributing to his expulsion, although insufficient evidence prevented a conviction. Following his expulsion, he relocated to Houston, Texas. In 1979, Correll and Dolores Howard, his girlfriend, welcomed their daughter, Nikisha Watts. However, shortly after her birth, Coral and Dolores ended their relationship and went their separate ways. Coral then entered into a marriage with Valeria Goodwill. Shortly after their union, Valeria noticed Coral exhibiting peculiar behavior. He constantly rearranged the furniture, used knives to chop up houseplants, broke candles, melted them onto a table, and scattered trash around the floors without bothering to clean it up. Additionally, after moments of intimacy, he would abruptly leave, disappearing for several hours. Unfortunately, their marriage only lasted 6 months. Watts' murders officially began when he was 20 years old in 1974, though there are suspicions he may have had more victims prior to this as well. He kidnapped his victims from their homes, subjected them to torture, and ultimately took their lives. Striking in various states, his victims were primarily thin, attractive white women who were between the ages of 14 and 44. Watts used different methods to murder his victims, including strangulation, stabbing, bludgeoning, and drowning. At 10:45 a.m. on October 25, 1974, Coral knocked on 23-year-old Leonore Nasachi's apartment door. Claiming to be looking for Charles, the name of one of his siblings, he engaged Leonore in conversation. When she opened the door with the chain still secured, Coral asked if he could leave a note. As she went to fetch paper, he suddenly attacked Nozaki and choked her into unconsciousness. Although Leonore later alerted police, they were unable to locate her assailant. 5 days later, on October 30th, 1974, Watts tortured and ruthlessly killed 20-year-old Gloria Steele, believed to be his second victim. A student at Western Michigan University, Gloria was also a mother. She was found with a crushed windpipe and 33 stab wounds to her chest inflicted by a wooden carving instrument. He didn't face a direct murder charge due to a lack of solid evidence. The only witness, Diane K. Williams, an apartment resident manager, observed a black man searching for Charles around the apartment complex. Upon seeing Williams, Corral seized her, forced her door open, and dragged her inside. During their struggle, Williams' phone rang, prompting her to knock it off the hook and scream for help. As her attacker fled, Williams saw him getting into a tan Pontiac Grand Prix. In a police lineup, both Williams and Nozaki identified Coral, who had been apprehended for stealing plywood from the Western Michigan University campus. For the Nozaki and Williams cases, he was taken into custody and charged with assault and battery on November 16, 1974. After being diagnosed with antisocial personality disorder and attempting to take his own life with a length of cord at the Kalamazoo Mental Hospital, Watts was relocated to the Center for Forensic Psychiatry in Michigan. When questioned about the death of Gloria Steele in 1975, he admitted being nearby the day before Gloria died. However, he denied being responsible for her death, despite confessing to attacking approximately 15 other young women. A search at Watts' residence by Detroit police, conducted under a search warrant, revealed a wooden carving tool, but no evidence linking him to Gloria's death. During his trial for the assault and battery of Nozaki and Williams, Watts entered a no-contest plea and was subsequently sentenced to a year in the county jail. Psychologists evaluating him characterized Watts as extremely hazardous, lacking remorse for his crimes, reckless, careless, and emotionally distant, with a high likelihood of relapsing. After that, a series of attacks occurred in the Detroit region over the span of a year, where he claimed the lives of 5 women. One peculiar discovery was that the majority of his crimes happened on Sunday mornings. This odd pattern earned the perpetrator the ominous nickname Sunday Morning Slasher for an Arbor newspaper, heightening the mystery surrounding the timing of these horrifying attacks, all occurring at around 4 a.m. In 1980, Shirley Small, a 17-year-old from Ann Arbor, Michigan, was fatally stabbed twice outside her home on April 20th. A similar attack targeted Glenda Richmond, 26, on July 13, 1980. Both cases lacked sufficient evidence for conviction, but exhibited Watts' characteristics. The first homicide directly attributed to Corell occurred on September 14, 1980, when 20-year-old graduate student Rebecca Hoff was found dead, having endured around 50 stab wounds. A 20-year-old named Dalpy survived an attack on October 6, 1980, but suffered severe consequences, including partial paralysis and muscle weakness. On November 1, 1980, a 30-year-old woman, Agnes, narrowly escaped an attack by a hooded man resembling Watts after raising the alarm while returning from a Halloween party. Although she identified Watts from photos, the dimly lit surroundings left uncertainty. In July 1980, local homicide investigators turned their attention to Watts, prompting the formation of a task force to delve into the Sunday slashings. Watts came under sporadic surveillance, and in November, a court order allowed officers to install a tracking device on his car. On November 15, 1980, around 5 in the morning, 2 patrol officers near Main Street, Ann Arbor observed a suspicious man in a car following a woman walking home. Realizing she was being tailed, the woman sought refuge in a doorway in an attempt to elude or pursue her. Coral, frustrated by losing track of the woman, was apprehended by the police when they pulled over his car for outdated license plates and driving with a suspended license. During the inspection of his vehicle, authorities found a package containing wood-filling equipment and a few screwdrivers. Their most significant discovery was a dictionary belonging to Rebecca Hoff, bearing the carved phrase, "Rebecca is a lover." However, it proved insufficient evidence to link him directly to her murder. In the spring of 1981, Coro relocated to Columbus, Texas, and secured employment with an oil firm. During the weekends, he would travel over 70 miles to his next hunting ground in the Houston region. Between 1974 and 1982, Watts committed murders of numerous women, totaling dozens. Despite the extensive list of victims, Watts managed to evade detection as a serial killer for nearly 8 years. Several factors contributed to this elusiveness. Watts operated across various jurisdictions and even different states, complicating the task of connecting the crimes. Additionally, his modus operandi diverged from typical patterns as he never engaged in physical intimacy with his victims, unlike many other serial killers targeting women and girls. Consequently, even with the emergence of DNA testing, linking the crimes proved challenging. Furthermore, Watts was not considered a suspect by those who knew him, and law enforcement did not identify him as a potential perpetrator until his arrest in 1982. On May 23, 1982, Melinda Aguilar, 18, and Lori Lister, 21, experienced a break-in at their Houston apartment by Watts. When Lori came back from work, Watts choked her down the steps outside the apartment. Subsequently, he entered the apartment and began strangling Melinda. Pretending to be unconscious, Melinda managed to escape being strangled completely. Watts wire-tied her hands behind her back with the intent to drown Lori. He carried Lori's body upstairs to the bathroom, filling the bathtub with water. However, Melinda seized the opportunity and leaped out of the window to seek help. Lori was saved, and Watts was apprehended after he initially tried evading capture. While he was in custody, investigators started linking him to recent killings of women. Despite the connections, Texas prosecutors believed there was insufficient evidence to secure a murder conviction against Watts. In May 1982, following the attacks on Melinda Aguilar and Lori Lister, Harris County Assistant District Attorney Ira Jones negotiated a plea bargain. Watts would admit fully to his crimes, receiving immunity from murder prosecution in exchange for a charge of burglary with intent to murder. He agreed to a 60-year sentence for this offense. Watts accepted the deal, leading detectives to the graves of 3 victims. Finally, Watts confessed to attacking 19 women, resulting in the murder of 13. He admitted to killing some victims, but also refrained from confessing to the deaths for a few. However, Michigan authorities declined to participate in the deal, leaving his cases in that state open. However, the hope for justice took a devastating turn when, shortly into his prison term, the Texas Court of Appeals ruled that Watts had not been informed that the bathtub and water he used in the attempt to drown Lori Lister were considered deadly weapons. This decision reclassified him as a nonviolent felon and eventually opened the door to early release. This was because Texas law at the time granted nonviolent felons 3 days deducted from their sentences for every 1 day served with good behavior. Watts, a model prisoner, accumulated time deductions that could have seen him released as early as May 9, 2006. The subsequent abolishment of the early release law, prompted by public outcry, brought little solace as it couldn't be retroactively applied as dictated by the Texas Constitution. In 2004, a plea for justice equated across the nation as Michigan Attorney General Mike Cox sought information to convict Watts of murder and prevent his potential release. Joseph Foy from Westland, Michigan bravely stepped forward, recounting the chilling sight of a man resembling Watts murdering 36-year-old Helen Dutcher on December 1, 1979. Helen had succumbed to 12 stab wounds. Foy identified Watts by his eyes, hauntingly describing them as evil and devoid of emotion. Despite Watts' immunity from prosecution for the 13 confessed killings in Texas, Michigan held no such agreement. As the 2004 trial approached, law enforcement officials implored the trial judge to allow the Texas confessions into evidence, a plea he accepted. Watts faced conviction for the murders of Helen Dutcher and Gloria Steele and received 2 life sentences without parole in a Michigan prison on November 17, 2004. He was sentenced to serve his time in a maximum security prison in Ionia, Michigan. However, he passed away from prostate cancer a few years after this sentence began on September 21, 2007. In a hospital in Jackson, Michigan. In the end, he escaped once again from serving his full sentence for the lives he took, leaving a somber end to his dark tale. Coral Eugene Watts, a malevolent serial killer, terrorized the country with his many, many killings. Despite confessions, legal loopholes allowed him a reduced sentence and almost led to his release. His later conviction for the 1979 murder of Helen Duckner exposed the depths of his darkness. Watts, a chilling reminder of hidden evil, left the Ann Arbor murders unsolved, casting a haunting shadow on his legacy. Born in the heart of Hong Kong on May 22, 1955, Lam Corwin faced a complex and turbulent upbringing. His father, Lam Wylock, led a challenging life with 2 mistresses, a legal wife, and 10 children, creating a tense family environment. Lam's early years were marred by severe mistreatment. When he and his biological mother lived in Malaysia, both endured violent domestic abuse from his father. Even after his parents separated, the situation didn't improve. His father's violent temper led to a traumatic incident in which 2-year-old Lam was left unconscious with periorbital bruising and a skull fracture after his father slammed his head against a wall. From 1957 to 1960, Lam lived in Brunei in a company dormitory, sharing the space with his father's mistresses and half-siblings before returning to Hong Kong. Though he excelled academically in primary school, starting junior high in 1968 at Richens Middle School in Sham Shui presented difficulties. His father's dual shifts and Lam's irregular schooling had taken a toll on his performance, especially in mathematics. By 1970, the demands of overseeing his father's motorcycle shop after school resulted in a downturn in Lam's academic standing. His connection with his father further crumbled, and this was characterized by severe treatment. This also prompted Lam to frequently escape from home. It had become a pattern in his life that persisted until his middle school years. After finishing secondary school, Lam had officially started working in his dad's motorcycle shop. Later, he moved on to learn air conditioning servicing through a relative. This whole experience, filled with family problems and tough times, had set the stage for the mysterious person Lam Corwin would eventually become. In early 1973, he had been kicked out of his home following an argument with his father. Near a public toilet on Hock Yuan Street in Hung Hom, he used a knife to coerce a woman into the restroom where he inappropriately touched her lower body. This incident led to his arrest. Upon examination, a doctor diagnosed Lam with mental issues, deeming him unfit for trial or imprisonment. Consequently, he was sentenced to treatment at King Shan Mental Hospital. After 102 days of treatment, he was discharged from the hospital and opted to change his name to Lam Jochum. By the age of 19, his family noticed his peculiar fascination with the female body, along with his collection of locked-away pornography stored in a metal ammunition box. His family did try to help him, but despite their efforts, nothing seemed to make a difference. When these actions failed to satisfy him, his behavior took a more disturbing turn. He purchased a Polaroid camera and began taking illicit pictures of women from under toilet cubicle doors, prompting the women to chase him down the street. Later, he had been caught peeking at his sister while she was undressed outside the bathroom at their Kwantong residence. Following this, the family made a decision to relocate to another place in To Kwa Wan. At their new home, he and his younger brother shared a room, dividing the space by sleeping in separate compartments of a bunk bed. An agreement was in place. Their belongings were to be kept distinct with no interference from the other side. By 1978, he had obtained a taxi license and adopted the name Lam Corwin upon officially starting his career as a taxi driver. Around 1980, he had been shifted to the night schedule, causing his family to only see him every 14 to 15 days. Then in 1981, a sudden interest in photography sparked within him, prompting him to delve into the study of this art form. However, lacking a dark room at home for printing color photos, he sought out a photo studio. To evade suspicion, he joined a photography class hosted by the Chinese YMCA of Hong Kong at the Waterloo Road Association. One of his fellow students worked in a Tim Shashue photo shop. Lam concocted a story claiming to work in a mortuary and, as a part-time photographer, needed assistance with autopsy images. Remarkably, his story was accepted, and the fellow student developed Lam's photos to avoid causing alarm among colleagues. After a year of working as a night taxi driver, his mother noticed a drastic change in his behavior. He started neglecting personal hygiene, refusing to change clothes or shower. His demeanor became forlorn, and his mother even witnessed him wandering home like a sleepwalker in the dead of night. On a gloomy night of February 3, 1982, at the age of 27, Lamb transformed into something more sinister than a mere peeping Tom. During his stint as a taxi driver in the Tsim Sha Tsui district, one day he was seeking customers who were returning home after a night out, and here is where things took a dark turn. At around 4 a.m., a visibly intoxicated woman named Chan Fong Lan came out from a restaurant, and she desperately needed a ride. Looking at the state she was in, many taxi drivers turned her down. Despite seeing this, Lamb, seemingly unaffected, welcomed her into his taxi and agreed to take her home. Midway through the journey, the drunk woman requested a stop, and as Lamb braked near a gas station, she opened the door to vomit. After this unsettling episode, she asked Lamb to go back in the opposite direction, unsure of her location. Lamb later confessed that he had hesitated to kill her initially, repulsed by her vomiting, but something within him snapped, and he decided he had had enough. He entered a garage, still in the Tsim Sha Tsui district, walked around to the passenger door, and used an electric cable to strangle the young woman. At 5 a.m., the time he normally finished his work, he drove to his house and parked as usual in front of the building. The street was deserted, so he hid the corpse in a large bag and carried it across the pavement into his apartment building. The night watchman slept on a cot in the entrance hall and did not wake up when Lamb passed. He entered the apartment as silently as possible and hid the body under the sofa. For several hours, Lamb pretended to be asleep in his bed, waiting for his family to leave after breakfast. Once his parents and brother left the apartment, he woke up and started to get his room ready. Lamb took 500 yuan from the victim's wallet and used that to buy a power saw from the street. He covered the floor with plastic to make sure that even the baseboards were well protected. He laid the body of the innocent woman on the plastic and started to dismember it. He was very careful to not leave any trace of blood behind, but that was an impossible task, and some of it splashed on the walls. Hours passed as he was still dismembering the body of the victim, during which he took photographs and videos of the whole process, after which he named the videotape Serious Secret. He cut her body into 7 pieces, wrapped the head, limbs, and torso with paper, and sealed it in a plastic bag. The most disturbing part was that he put the private parts into a Tupperware container with rice wine for preservation. He methodically cleaned the crime scene, rolled up the plastic sheet, and scrubbed the floor and walls, leaving no trace of the horror that had unfolded. Making several trips to transport the body parts to his taxi, he remained unnoticed by passers-by. Satisfied that he'd erased any evidence of the disturbing act, he drove to the new territories. He was determined to find a secluded place to dump the body and stopped when he found a deserted spot on the banks of the Xingman River near Chaten. Making sure no one saw him, he took the packages out of his trunk, one after the other, and threw them into the river. The muddy waters carried the bundles to the sea. The limbs were washed down by the heavy rain and floated from Lucky Plaza to the Bel Air Gardens area. More than a week after the heinous act, Lamb had heard a chilling revelation on the radio. A limb had been discovered on the bank of the Xingman River. Subsequent days brought the unsettling discoveries of more body parts, leaving the police to reconstruct the tragic puzzle. Investigators used tidal patterns to estimate the approximate time the body was disposed into the river. Notably, one of the arms bore a rare tattoo, a heart with a knife through it, an unusual marking for women at the time. This is what led them to identifying the victim. It was 21-year-old Chan Fong Lan. Despite launching a public appeal for witnesses, the police faced unfortunate challenges. The taxi driver didn't come forward, and Chan Fong Lan's friends hadn't noticed the license plate. It took more than a week for Lamb to hear about the discovery of the body parts. The police had identified the body as that of Chan Fong Lan, a mother of 2 and a nightclub hostess in Tsim Sha Tsui. The grim details revealed Chan's night out with her sister and friends, her taxi rides home, and the tragic fate she met at the hands of Lam Corwin. Lam Corwin's first murder had been opportunistic, but the next one was meticulously planned. He, being a perfectionist, was resolute in being better prepared. He aimed for surgical precision, Hence, he opted for professional equipment instead of a power saw. He had extensively studied knives, blades, and scissors, and ultimately purchasing specialized surgical instruments along with several bottles of formaldehyde. Formaldehyde was a strong-smelling, colorless chemical used for preserving and disinfecting. On May 29, 1982, 3 days after purchasing his equipment, Lamb had claimed another victim. His second target, also a bar worker, fell prey to him. This time, he calmly chose Chonwon Kit and strangled her with an electric cable before taking her home. As before, he waited in bed for his family to leave work and then commenced the gruesome task of dismembering the body. Lamb had spent days contemplating his actions and meticulously prepared the room according to his plan. He had placed a large tray under the body to prevent blood from staining the floor, and then he had retrieved his video camera. Upon later inspection of the video, investigators discovered that he had placed the tray under the family's parakeet cage. While carefully cutting up the body, Lamb showed great skill. When he finished chopping it into pieces, Lamb took pictures of the body parts once again. As he thought a lot about a safe place to get rid of the body, he finally found the perfect spot after many nighttime trips. This time, he put the body parts in a big plastic bag and placed it in his taxi's trunk. Early in the morning, he drove through the tunnel to Hong Kong Island. The chosen place, Tai Hang Road, a densely wooded residential area, was a 20-minute drive east of the city center. After he parked in a hidden part of the street, he started having trouble carrying the heavy bag out of the trunk. He carried it a short way up to the railing and threw the body over it while he watched it roll down the slope into a muddy ravine. In the days that followed, Lamb had constantly reflected on the events of that night, not because he had felt guilty or remorseful, but because he had wanted to improve himself. 2 weeks later, he had struck again. On June 17, 1982, Ling Saw-Wan, a 29-year-old nightclub cleaner, had finished her shift at 4 a.m. and held a taxi driven by Lamb. Shortly after, she met her tragic fate. Lamb brought her lifeless body back to his residence, where he indulged in a chilling series of actions. He documented his horrific acts, capturing them on both photographs and video, titling the recording Operation Rainy Night. Using the selfie function on his camcorder positioned on the bunk bed, Lamb filmed the dismemberment process, displaying an unsettling level of detail compared to his previous action. This time, he went as far as cutting open the abdomen, extracting the intestine, and even attempting to taste human flesh, albeit abandoning the attempt due to its nauseating effect. He then left the severed limbs in a burlap bag on Tai Hang Road, marking yet another horrifying chapter in this grim spree. With each crime, Lamb had become more daring. He had spent his time carefully preparing his next crime. Being familiar with the bars in Tsim Sha Tsui neighborhood, he knew the places where women often waited alone for his taxi. His first 3 victims had been what he had called bad girls, but he had wanted the next victim to be a woman of a higher social class. Deliberately, he opted to choose a young woman who appeared innocent, and this time it was 17-year-old Ling Wei-sum. Lamb had found her outside the hotel in Tsim Sha Tsui on July 2, 1982. She had attended a party at her high school before the final exams, but had decided to leave after dinner. Her friends from high school had put her in a taxi to ensure she would get home safely. Lamb led her to a secluded road and parked his car. The teenager was terrified when he grabbed her wrist and handcuffed her to the front seat. It was only 9:30 p.m., which was too early for him to return home, but that wasn't the only reason he wanted to keep her in his taxi. He surprisingly wanted company. He wanted to talk to her. Without any friends and desperate for a companion, he kept Ling tied up for hours, asking questions about her family, religion, and life in general. Lamb was generally enjoying her company. That wasn't enough to hinder his macabre plan. The teenager fell asleep at around 4 a.m. This is when Lamb started to strangle her with the electric cable. After this, he took the lifeless body of the innocent girl home and waited as usual for his family to leave the apartment. Once no one was at home, he attached his video camera to a high shelf to record. This was the video that would end up being later shown in court by the police. The video was more than disturbing. In the video, Lamb was engaging in inappropriate acts with the dead body, an act of necrophilia. Something important to be noted was that when he was earlier setting up the lighting equipment to film his activities, a lamp had fallen on the young victim's thighs and it burnt her skin. He also took pictures of her and videotaped it to subsequently name it as Fourth Operation. Then he cut the body into pieces as he had done with the previous victims, which would later come back to haunt him. Later, he abandoned the corpse on Taihang Road. On August 10, 1982, Lam sought to enlarge the dismembered photo of his fourth victim. Coincidentally, the enlarger at his friend's photo shop was faulty, so Lam's friend transferred Lam's negatives to the Mung Kok branch for magnification. During the manual enlargement process, the branch's photo editors noticed unsettling details in the developed photos, indicating a potential connection to a human body's dismemberment. Suspicious as he was, the shop's supervisor alerted the police due to features like a burn mark on the victim's thigh and a picture of a severed breast. Upon receiving the report, the police assigned the case to the Kowloon Regional Homicide Squad. Sergeant Lee Kwan led detectives to gather statements from the clerks at the Tsim Sha Tsui and Mon Kok branches, securing the photos and negatives. The forensic officer from the Scientific Forensics Department conducted detailed examinations. Analysis of the flesh and blood color inferred that the photographed corpse had been deceased for less than 3 hours. The manner of dismemberment suggested that the perpetrator lacked medical anatomical knowledge, eliminating the possibility of them being teaching pictures. Notably absent was the usual green sheet used in autopsies. Forensic experts also confirmed that the photos were not printed matter, but direct photographs from a real corpse. Additionally, a small water droplet captured in one photo reflected half the face of a girl resembling Ling Yaisung, who had vanished on July 2nd. Based on the findings of the medical examiner and scientific forensics division, the police concluded that Ling had been murdered and decided to proceed with an arrest. On the morning of August 17th, Sergeant Lee had led the team in an ambush at the photo shop. He instructed the clerk to mix several other photos in with Lam's set of 13 photos and urged him to engage Lam in discussions about the photos, their locations, and the purpose of the enlargement. The aim was to record the conversation and gather evidence. Around 6 o'clock in the evening, Lam arrived by taxi to collect the photos. He meticulously inspected each photo as requested by his friend and explained that the enlarged photos would be used for courtroom presentations, particularly for jurors to view the contents more clearly. Lam claimed he frequently worked in different mortuaries. After confirming the photos and settling the payment, Sergeant Lee disclosed his identity and promptly arrested Lam. Initially, Lam concocted a fabricated story, attributing the photos to a supposed four-eyed guy from the Oriental Daily whom he had planned to meet in Tokwa-wan. However, investigations revealed that no such person existed. Consequently, the authorities swiftly applied for a warrant to search Lam's residence within the 48-hour legal time frame to obtain physical evidence. Otherwise, they would have been required to release him. During the search, they discovered severed body parts, including breasts and vaginas belonging to the deceased women, personal items, preservatives, anatomy books, and surgical tools in Lam's cupboards. The police also seized and searched his taxi, leaving a note on the windshield that indicated its involvement in a crime and said that it was not to be towed. Further examination of the vehicle revealed evidence such as handcuffs and wire in the glove compartment, along with 2 holes in the back of the front seat likely caused by one of the deceased women's high heels during a struggle. Reportedly, investigators retrieved an extensive collection, including 696 negatives, 1,500 color slides, and 1,900 meticulously coded photographs documenting Korjuan's victims across various stages of his crimes. His meticulous record-keeping significantly aided the police investigation. Ultimately, authorities successfully located the body parts belonging to all of his victims, enabling their identification and subsequent return to their respective families. Lam Korjuan, alongside his younger brother and father, were brought to the police station to aid the investigation. Given the cramped living space and the volume of evidence discovered in the bedroom shared by Lam and his brother, authorities suspected that the taxi driver hadn't acted alone. Lin was released after 3 days of intensive questioning and custody. The younger Lam maintained that due to their different schedules, he rarely encountered his brother and had no involvement or knowledge of the incidents. To hasten their release, their father and younger brother urged Corwin to clarify that they were not involved. In an attempt to persuade her son to confess, Lamb's mother also visited the police station. Corwin cooperated with authorities in locating the victims' body parts. However, despite their cooperation, the police still believed that the younger Lamb might have been implicated. Consequently, both brothers were charged with 4 counts of murder and presented at Sampokong Magistrates Court. They were later transferred to the Su Lam Psychiatric Center for assessment. Supporting the younger brother's consistent denial of involvement, he was eventually released due to insufficient evidence after the 6th hearing. Meanwhile, a medical evaluation confirmed that Corwin was of sound mind, exhibiting a remarkably high IQ, reportedly over 130, and was deemed fit to stand trial. With prima facie evidence established, the case was referred to the Supreme Court for trial. The trial started on March 3, 1983, and many people gathered outside the court to see how Lamb would behave. Authorities stated the case's details were too distressing for women. Hence, 7 male jurors were carefully selected to ensure a fair trial. To prevent shock, only the lawyers, judges, and jurors were allowed to view Lamb's videotapes. Additionally, the victim's organs were kept out of the courtroom. Throughout the trial, the prosecution presented police office, Photoshop staff, forensic and scientific experts, and even Lamb's family as witnesses. Realizing the weight of the evidence against him, Lamb sought a deal, admitting to manslaughter in exchange for a reduced sentence. However, this plea was rejected. The judge directed the jury not to debate Lamb's guilt, but to decide between murder or manslaughter charges. The trial delved into debates over Lamb's mental state involving testimonies from 5 psychiatrists. 3 suggested an obsession with women, while 2 questioned his self-control. After 18 days, on April 8 the same year, the judge instructed the jury to deliver a verdict based on whether they believed Lamb had control over his actions during the crimes. After over 3 hours of deliberation, the jury unanimously found Lamb sane, driven by abnormal desires and guilty of murder. Initially sentenced to death by hanging, Lamb's punishment was commuted to life imprisonment after Hong Kong abolished capital punishment in 1984, courtesy of the governor's pardon. After his conviction, Lamb was sent to Stanley Prison and later transferred to Shekpik Prison, where inmates referred to him as Lamb. He maintained a quiet demeanor, avoiding discussions about his past and preferring solitude. Reports indicated that he earned a small salary, remained reserved, and didn't engage much with others. He spent time reading newspaper, medical, and religious texts, and participated in Catholic and Christian classes within the prison. Although he received occasional visits from church volunteers, he had no family visits. His cell was filled with newspapers and books, and he developed a reputation among inmates for his knowledge of purple star astrology, a form of Chinese fortune-telling. Even prison officers sought his advice. In 2018, at 62 years old and having served more than 34 years, Lamb applied for parole, which sparked public concern. Despite the parole board's periodic review every 5 years, concerns about the potential for repeated offenses led them to decide against changes or parole at that time. Reports also suggested that Lamb was seen by some prisoners dissecting cockroaches in prison and creating intricate displays out of them as stored in a matchbox. During the 1983 trial, Lamb's mother testified about the abuse her eldest son endured as a child, detailing how Corwin's father had been physically violent, even causing severe head trauma when the boy was just 2 years old, resulting in 2 black eyes. She herself had also experienced abuse within the family. Experts have linked severe childhood head injuries with later psychological issues such as necrophilia. It was reported that Lamb mentioned to a psychiatrist that he believed he received instructions from God to commit the killings. Throughout the investigation, Lamb's actions remained shrouded in mystery. His choice of a Kodak shop for developing films, despite owning the necessary equipment, left investigators puzzled. Some speculated that he might have subconsciously desired arrest, having nearly faced it before. The autopsy's grim findings, coupled with the way the bodies were dismembered, raised suspicions of a professional killer at work. Yet, amidst these chilling details, Lamb's family faced challenges due to the case's attention. They attempted to sell their apartment, but struggled due to its notoriety, leaving them with no option but to continue residing there. Following the case's conclusion, the police, wary of potential media exploitation, destroyed all tapes and photos captured by Lamb. However, some of the victims' organs found a different fate. They're housed at the Wan Chai Forensic Medicine Headquarters for educational purposes. On November 16, 1986, Lamb's father sought a form of redemption for his son's sins by dedicating a memorial tablet at Yuanjin College, a somber acknowledgement of the lives lost to his son's malevolence. As we near the end of Lamb Corwin's chilling saga, it's essential to remember the 4 innocent women whose lives were tragically taken. Lamb's story is a haunting testament to the complexities of the human mind and the devastating consequences they can produce. Such narratives emphasize the urgent need for a deeper understanding of mental health, greater awareness, and the importance of addressing these issues. Now 68 years old, Lamb Corwin is serving a life sentence in the maximum security Shekpik prison on Lantau Island for the horrific murders that shook Hong Kong in the early 1980s. His name is forever etched in the city's history as its first serial killer. His reign of terror ended on that fateful day of his arrest, August 17, 1982, when he was just 27 years old. Sherry Black's hobbies in her youth helped shape the fulfilling life she built as an adult. Growing up in a family that owned a bowling alley, Sherry became a skilled bowler. She joined various competitive bowling leagues and traveled across the United States to compete. It was through one of these leagues that she met Earl Black, the man who would become her husband. The couple married in April of 1965, and soon after, Sherry channeled their mutual love for the outdoors and animals into a career as a docent at the Hogle Zoo in Salt Lake City, Utah. Sherry and Earl had 2 children, Heidi and Jason. Tragically, Jason passed away in 1989 at the age of 18. Heidi later married Greg Miller and had 6 children, all of whom were dearly loved by Sherry and Earl. Heidi raised her children in a home next to her parents, allowing Sherry and Earl to be an active part of their grandchildren's lives. The fall of 2010 brought several changes for Sherry and her family. By then, Sherry and Earl had 1 great-granddaughter, and their first great-grandson was expected in the spring. Their oldest grandson had recently arrived in Chile, where he would serve as a missionary for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Heidi, their daughter, had married into a well-known Utah family that owned multiple car dealerships and the Utah Jazz NBA team. While the Blacks maintained a more modest lifestyle, they worked hard and eventually turned their passions into business ventures. Sherry's lifelong love of reading allowed her to build a business selling books. Earl worked making custom knives and pool tables. The growing space they needed for their businesses led to Sherry and Earl building a store connected to their home of almost 40 years, which was tucked back from a busy 8-lane highway in South Salt Lake, Utah. They worked alongside each other in the store they named B&W Billiards and Books. November 30th, 2010 started out as a normal day for Earl Black. However, his day and the rest of his life abruptly went off track shortly before 2 o'clock that afternoon when he arrived at the store he shared with his wife. When he went inside, he discovered Sherry's body. A pair of scissors was lodged in her chest and there were lacerations on her head and her neck. She was partially naked and later examination of her body would find signs that she had been sexually assaulted after she was killed. In addition to being assaulted after she was killed, in addition to being stabbed, she had also been beaten. A distraught Earl called 911 and authorities were sued on the scene. Earl was taken to the police station, where he met with for the rest of the day and most of the evening. The investigation into Sherry's death was stymied early on because no one could identify a motive for the murder. When police canvassed the neighborhood, everyone described Sherry as the ideal neighbor. She was quiet but very friendly and never caused any problems in the neighborhood. There were no signs of forced entry at the scene. Robbery did not appear to be the motive for the murder because cash was still in the register, but there was no way of knowing if any valuable books had been taken from the store. While there was a digital record of some of the books Sherry owned because she was offering them for sale on Amazon, there were no such records for the books she planned to sell directly. Sherry kept no records of the books she had in her collection, instead keeping her inventory in her head, which was a common enough practice, according to some of her acquaintances in the used book business. Sherry had been selling books for approximately a decade at the time of her death. A large part of her business involved sourcing used books at thrift stores and estate sales. Thanks to her lifelong love of reading, she had a talent for being able to discern which books were valuable and which ones were not worth reselling. She would sell used children's books and novels by listing them on Amazon.com. Most of the items Sherry sold online were not particularly valuable, with a notable exception being a hardcover edition of John Steinbeck's The Grapes of Wrath, which she had listed for sale on Amazon for just over $2,700 at the time of her death. Sherry was also involved in the world of selling vintage books and texts connected to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, combining her love of books with her faith. Early LDS literature is highly prized amongst collectors, and some rare books sell for $101,000. While Sherry had been involved in some higher ticket sales, she generally sold collectible church-related texts that were valued at between $100 and $300. Since she had no inventory records for this part of her collection, it was theoretically possible that her killer had stolen a valuable book. Sherry's bookstore did not run on a traditional retail model. She had almost no customers walk in off the street and almost exclusively bought and sold books at the shop by appointment. This allowed her to run personal errands or search for new books to sell during normal business hours. Sherry had an impeccable reputation amongst other booksellers and dealers of LDS literature, as well as with her customers. She was known for her integrity, and her customers would come back to sell to her again and again because she was always fair in her transactions. She cared about books and protecting the history they contained, but also about the people who trusted her enough to be her customers. Sherry was unknowingly involved in one criminal transaction, something she was horrified to learn of after the fact. In February of 2009, she paid a 20-year-old named Lauren Nielsen $20,000 for 14 rare books connected to the early history of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, including a second edition of the Book of Mormon. Nielsen had sold books to her before and had later purchased some of them back from her. Nielsen's father was a church president in a polygamous offshoot church. In March of 2009, he noticed that several of the books in his collection of rare LDS texts were missing. He reviewed his security footage and saw his son Lauren removing the books from his personal library on February 20th. Lauren had been at the home, which also served as a church meeting place, for a funeral that day. The elder Nielsen confronted his son about the books, and Lauren admitted to taking them and selling them at B&W Billiards and Books. He then threatened his father, telling him that he would not be happy with the chain of events that would unfold if he contacted the police. Lauren claimed this was because he was a member of a local gang. Lauren's father still called the police, who in turn contacted Sherry Black. She was very upset to learn that she had purchased stolen property. She told the police the approximate value of the book she had purchased from Lauren was $45,000, a figure confirmed by another book dealer. Sherry was fully cooperative with police when she learned about the theft. She had only sold one of the books, a first edition of the French version of the Book of Mormon, to another book dealer for $10,000. She returned the rest of the stolen books as soon as she was notified that they were stolen. Nielsen pled guilty to theft and theft by deception in April of 2009 and sentenced to 90 days in jail. This led to speculation that he may have killed Sherry in retaliation for her cooperation in the investigation into his theft. Nielsen was booked into the Salt Lake County Jail for violating his parole shortly after Sherry's murder, but police would not confirm if he was being investigated in connection with the crime. Sherry's killer had left behind his blood, palm print, and fingerprints at the crime scene. Police believed he had cut his hand when he was in the process of stabbing Sherry, resulting in his blood being found at the scene. Nielsen's DNA and fingerprints were not a match to this evidence, eliminating him as a suspect. Police had one other piece of evidence left behind at the scene, an Armani exchange belt. The belt, which may have been a knockoff, did not belong to anyone in the Black family. Its size indicated it would fit someone with a 36 to 38-inch waist. There was a sticker on the back of the buckle, printed with the number 323. Authorities hoped that this number was an inventory or thrift store number but could never track it down. Sherry's husband Earl was devastated by her death. He never slept in the home he had shared with Sherry for nearly 4 decades again after her murder, and he began missing the family events that had been so central to his life with Sherry. Sherry's grandchildren mourned the fact that their children would not grow up with Sherry as the important and involved figure she had been in their lives. While they struggled with their grief, the Black family also did what they could to bring Sherry's killer to justice and to preserve her memory. They established the Sherry Black Foundation to educate police departments about emerging forensic techniques. They maintained a website with information about the case and regularly put up billboards asking for tips. The reward they offered for information in the case eventually grew to $250,000 million. While police had the killer's DNA, they could not find a match to it in the FBI's national database. As years passed with no suspect identified in the case, they eventually turned to the novel DNA techniques advocated for by the Black family. On the 7th anniversary of Sherry's murder, the South Salt Lake Police Department held a press conference at which they released composite images of what the man responsible for Sherry's murder may look like at different ages. The images were generated by Parabod Nanolabs using their DNA phenotyping technology, which uses DNA profiles to identify certain features that the contributor of that DNA may have. This was the first time the technology was used in a case in Utah. The effort did result in numerous tips being called in, but did not lead to Sherry's killer being identified. Just a few years later, investigators turned to genetic genealogy to help them identify a suspect in Sherry's case. They were able to narrow down their suspect pool to a single family. They then contacted one member of this family, who agreed to meet with investigators and provide details about their family tree. This effort led to the identification of a potential suspect. He was then placed under surveillance and followed to a public place where police surreptitiously collected a sample of his DNA from a discarded item. The DNA was tested and found to be a match to the DNA found at Sherry's crime scene. On October 7, 2020, a direct DNA sample was collected from the suspect and submitted to the Utah Bureau of Forensic Services. The following day, they confirmed that it was this man's DNA found at the crime scene. On October 10, 2020, just weeks before 10th anniversary of Sherry's murder, this individual was arrested and charged with the crime. He was publicly identified as 29-year-old Adam Durborough of Orem, Utah. Following his arrest and after he was advised of his rights, Durborough confessed to Sherry's murder. He further stated that he had followed the case online and in the local media and had been aware that the DNA evidence had been recovered at the scene. Durborough's fingerprints and palm print would later be matched to those from the crime scene. At the time of the murder, Durborough had been just 19 years old and living less than a mile away from Sherry's home and store at the home of his biological mother. Durborough's criminal record stretches back to his teenage years. In 2006, when he was just 14 years old, he was convicted of attempted rape and aggravated assault in Davis County Juvenile Court. It is unclear if Durborough's DNA was collected after this conviction or if it was expunged from the database when he reached the age of majority. For either reason, it was not in the offender database when the samples from Sherry Black's case were run through the system in 2010. Durborough was again convicted of a crime as a juvenile in 2008 at the age of 16 in Iron County. This conviction was for aggravated assault with weapon or force. Durborough ended up at a juvenile facility in Salt Lake County, where he participated in a program which allowed him to complete his junior and senior years of high school while in the care of the juvenile justice system. On September 16, 2010, Durborough shoplifted 2 CDs from a Shopko store in West Valley City. He pled guilty to a misdemeanor theft charge on October 27th. He was sentenced to 60 days in jail, but the judge suspended the sentence, and Durborough was given probation. Just over a month later, Sherry Black would be killed. While he was now a legal adult, Durborough was still in the custody of the Utah Division of Juvenile Justice Services, and following his shoplifting conviction, he was placed in a foster home under the jurisdiction of Pioneer Youth and Adult Community Services. It was while he was in one of these homes that he committed his last known criminal act. In January of 2011, he stole watches from a jewelry box in his foster home. He later told police he had taken the watches because he had caught 2 men he worked with smoking marijuana and dealing pills. They told him that he would be fired if he could not prove that he was not going to report them, so he took the watches to give to them as collateral so that he could keep his job. The watches were recovered and the man Durborough had given them to was convicted of misdemeanor theft. Durborough was sentenced to 6 months in jail, and he began serving that sentence at the end of March of 2011. Durbarox's only run-in with the law after 2011 was an infraction for failing to have insurance, which was ultimately dismissed. Durbarox's DNA was not entered in the criminal database after either of his theft convictions because he pleaded guilty to a Class B misdemeanor in each case. In the state of Utah, only individuals convicted of felonies and Class A misdemeanors are required to submit samples of their DNA. Durbaro formally pled guilty to aggravated murder in 3rd District Court on October 4, 2021. His sentencing hearing was then held on February 23, 2022. At that hearing, Durbaro's defense team asked the judge to sentence him to 25 years to life in prison, which would leave open the possibility of him one day being released on parole. They argued that Durbaro had cooperated by pleading guilty. They also argued that the murder had occurred because of the anger issues Durbaro had as a result of his difficult childhood, during which he endured things which they said no child should go through. This was presumably in reference to Durbaro's adoptive father, Joseph Durbaro. He was arrested in 2002 for child pornography charges related to his child modeling photography business. He would serve time in both federal prison and the Utah State Prison after being convicted of charges of child pornography and sexually abusing children. Adam Durbaro's lawyers argued that while this in no way excused his actions, it should be taken into account when he was sentenced. According to Sherry's family, she would have felt sympathy for Durbaro and his circumstances had he made different choices. She helped anyone she could, any way she could. Sherry's oldest grandchild, Courtney Hawks, told the court, "There's the real irony of all of this. She would have been an advocate for this perpetrator if only he'd chosen a different path. Instead, he preyed upon her. He brutally took out all his anger and frustration and rage on her like she was nothing, and she was not nothing." Numerous members of Sherry's family addressed the court during the hearing, providing stories of Sherry's life and how difficult the past 11 years had been without her. They requested that Durbaro be sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. They had worried about him being free for the 10 years after the murder and prior to his arrest and could not move on if they knew he could be free to hurt someone else in the future. Before sentencing Durbaro, 3rd District Judge Randall Scanchi stated that he felt sorrow at both the loss of Sherry's life and the impact it had on her loving family, as well as the fact that Durbarox had no such support system. While he believed Durbarox was sorry for what he had done, he also believed that the crime was egregious and spontaneous. He sentenced Durbarox to life in prison with no possibility of parole. Sherry's family issued a public statement following Durbaro's sentencing. While this sentence delivers a sense of justice, no punishment imposed can heal the pain or fill the void created by Durbarox when he chose to take the life of our beloved Sherry. The statement said in part, although he took her life, he could not take her soul, which lives on and is part of the love, beauty, kindness, and talents that her husband, daughter, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren will carry forward. Her legacy is a gift to future generations. The life she led and the influence she had can never be taken away. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the depths of unsolved mysteries. Cold cases not only challenge our understanding of the past, but also ignite our curiosity and determination for answers. Remember to subscribe to stay updated on our latest investigations. And if you have any information regarding the cases we've covered, don't hesitate to reach out. Together, we can shed light on the shadows of the past and bring closure to those who seek it. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay curious, and never stop seeking the truth.